Starting today, Mom, the bank will transfer everything to my account. You won't have anything left, just a coffin to die in. I swallowed hard. My throat felt tight, but I didn't say a word. I just stood there in my study, watching my only son wave legal papers in my face like they were trophy flags. Adrian was 32 years old, wearing the Tom Ford suit I'd bought him for Christmas, and his eyes held something I'd never seen before. Not just defiance, but genuine contempt. Behind him, hovering in the doorway like a predator waiting for the kill to be confirmed, stood Sloane, his fiancée. Her perfectly manicured nails drummed against the doorframe. And that smile, God, that smile, told me everything I needed to know about who had planted these words in my son's mouth. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows of my Greenwich estate, hitting the crystal paperweight on my mahogany desk. That paperweight was a gift from my mother 30 years ago, back when I was just starting my consulting firm. Back when I had nothing but ambition and a stubborn refusal to stay poor. Now I had $42 million in assets, properties across 3 states, and a son who apparently thought I should have nothing but a coffin. Did you hear me, Mother? Adrian's voice cracked slightly on that last word, and for a second, just a fleeting second, I saw the boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. But then Sloane shifted her weight, and his jaw hardened again. I have power of attorney. Harold verified everything. The transfers start tomorrow morning. Harold Pemberton, my estate attorney for 15 years. My chest tightened at the mention of his name, but I kept my face perfectly still. I'd learned decades ago in boardrooms full of men twice my size that showing emotion was handing them a weapon. So I did what I'd always done when cornered. I went quiet. Strategic silence, my late husband Thomas used to call it. Isabel, he'd say, you're most dangerous when you're quiet. I nodded slowly, setting down the portfolio I'd been reviewing. I see. That was all I said. 2 words. Adrian had clearly expected tears, begging, maybe even rage. What he got was 2 words and my steady gaze. It unsettled him. I could see it in the way his hand trembled slightly as he set the papers on my desk, in the way he couldn't quite meet my eyes for more than a few seconds. This is what's best, Sloane interjected, stepping fully into the room now. She wore a white Chanel suit that I'm absolutely certain came from my credit card. Adrian needs to establish himself as head of this family. You've had your time, Isabel. You built something wonderful, but now it's time to pass the torch. Pass the torch, as if my life's work was a relay race and I'd simply been keeping the baton warm. I looked at this 28-year-old woman with her Instagram-perfect hair and her 340,000 followers who thought she lived a luxury lifestyle, and I saw exactly what she was. A predator. A beautiful, calculated predator who'd identified my son as her golden ticket and was now cashing in. I understand, I said quietly. I'm feeling quite tired. I think I'll rest now. Adrian's brow furrowed. This wasn't the script Sloane had prepared him for. That's it? You're just okay with this? Would screaming change anything? I asked, my voice steady. You've clearly made your decision. You're a grown man. If you believe this is the right path, then I suppose I raised you to make your own choices. The guilt flashed across his face so quickly, I almost missed it. Almost. But I'd been reading Adrian's expressions since the moment he was born, and I knew every micro-movement of his features. He felt guilty. Good. He should. Sloane's smile faltered for just a moment. She'd wanted a scene, I realized. She'd wanted me broken and desperate so she could position herself as the reasonable one, the one who'd convinced Adrian to at least leave me comfortable in my old age. But I wasn't giving her that satisfaction. I stood up slowly, gathering my papers with steady hands, even though my heart was hammering against my ribs. If you'll excuse me, I have some things to attend to. They left my study, and I listened to their footsteps retreat down the marble hallway. The same hallway I'd personally designed when Thomas and I bought this house 23 years ago. The same house where Adrian took his first steps, had his first birthday party, brought home his first girlfriend. Every corner of this mansion held memories of the life I'd built, the family I'd tried so hard to protect and provide for. I waited until I heard their voices fade toward the east wing before I moved. My hands were shaking now, not from fear, but from fury so pure it felt like electricity in my veins. I walked to the window and looked out at the manicured gardens, the fountain that cost $90,000, the guest house that Sloane had already claimed for her content creation studio. My son had just told me I deserved nothing but a coffin to die in. My son. The baby I'd held through colic-filled nights when Thomas was away at architecture conferences. The toddler I'd sung to sleep every night for 3 years. The teenager I defended when the headmaster wanted to expel him for that prank with the smoke bombs. The young man whose business failures I'd quietly absorbed, 3 failed startups totaling over $500,000 in losses. The 32-year-old man who'd never held a steady job for more than 18 months, who'd burned through his grandmother's trust fund of $500,000 in less than 3 years, who'd racked up gambling debts I'd paid off without ever mentioning them. That man had just threatened me in my own home. I pulled out my phone and dialed Margaret Chen. My best friend answered on the second ring. "Isabel? What's wrong? You sound... Can you come over?" My voice cracked, despite my best efforts. "I need you. I'm leaving my office now. 20 minutes. I hung up and sat down in Thomas's old leather chair, the one piece of furniture from his architecture studio that I'd kept after his death. It still smelled faintly of his cologne, even after 5 years. I closed my eyes and tried to steady my breathing, but all I could see was Adrian's face, twisted with contempt, telling me I deserved nothing but a coffin. Where had I gone wrong? The question looped through my mind as I sat there. I'd given him everything. The best schools, Choate Rosemary Hall for high school, Georgetown for undergrad. I'd paid for the MBA program he'd dropped out of after 1 semester because he didn't connect with the material. I'd funded his startups even when my financial advisors warned me they were vanity projects with no viable business models. I'd introduced him to my network, helped him secure meetings with venture capitalists, co-signed leases when his credit was too poor to qualify a loan. I'd protected him from every consequence, smoothed over every failure, caught him every single time he fell. And apparently, that had been my greatest mistake. Margaret arrived exactly 20 minutes later. I heard her car in the driveway, her quick footsteps up the front stairs, and then she was in my study, her power suit slightly wrinkled from the drive, her expression fierce. "Tell me what happened." I told her everything. Every word Adrian had said, every smile Sloane had worn, every legal document Harold had apparently validated. Margaret listened without interrupting, her jaw getting tighter with each sentence. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "That little shit." Despite everything, I almost laughed. Margaret had never particularly liked Adrian, but she'd always been diplomatic about it for my sake. Apparently, diplomacy was over. "He used the power of attorney papers you signed last year," she said, pulling out her phone. "The ones for banking convenience when you had that health scare." I nodded. I'd had a minor heart arrhythmia 14 months ago. Nothing serious, but it had scared me enough to get my affairs in order. I'd given Adrian limited power of attorney to handle banking decisions if I was ever incapacitated. Limited. The key word there was limited. "Margaret, tell me honestly, can he actually do this?" She was already typing furiously on her phone. "Not even close. Those POA documents had very specific parameters. If he's claiming full access to your accounts, he's either lying or he's committed fraud by altering them. Either way, we can stop this." She looked up at me, her eyes sharp. "But Isabel, we need to talk about something more important. Do you want to stop this?" "Of course No, listen to me." She set her phone down and grabbed my hands. "Do you want to stop this legally? Send your son to prison for fraud and never speak to him again? Or do you want something else?" The question hung in the air between us. I thought about Adrian's face when he delivered that coffin line. I thought about the slight tremor in his hand. I thought about the guilt I'd seen flash across his features when I hadn't fought back. "I want my son back," I whispered. "I want the boy I raised, not this stranger Sloane has created." Margaret squeezed my hands. "Then we're not going to stop this legally. Not right away." At my confused look, she smiled. A smile that reminded me exactly why she'd made partner at her law firm by age 36. "We're going to let Adrian think he won, and then we're going to show him exactly what happens when you betray Isabel Ravencroft." "What do you mean?" "How well do you know your house, Isabel?" "I mean really know it?" I frowned. "I designed most of it." "Why? That antique armoire in your bedroom, The one that belonged to your mother. Does anyone ever look inside it? Understanding began to dawn. No, Adrian has never shown any interest in my mother's furniture. Perfect. Margaret's smile widened. Because that's where we're going to keep everything. Every single piece of evidence we're about to collect. Bank statements, email records, phone transcripts, altered legal documents, everything. We're going to build a case so airtight that when the time comes, Adrian won't be able to breathe without our permission. And then you're going to give him a choice. Prison or redemption. That could take weeks. Probably months, Margaret agreed. Can you handle living with them that long? Letting them think they've won? I thought about my mother, who'd cleaned offices at night to feed me, who'd taught me that survival sometimes meant swallowing your pride, who'd shown me that the strongest steel was forged in the hottest fires. Yes, I said, I can handle it. Good, because starting tomorrow, your son is going to think he owns everything. He's going to treat you like a burden, like a guest in your own home. Sloan is going to redecorate, throw parties, spend money like water. And you're going to let them. You're going to be quiet, stay out of their way, and document absolutely everything. That night, after Margaret left, I sat alone in my study as darkness fell over Greenwich. Downstairs, I could hear Adrian and Sloan laughing, popping champagne, celebrating their victory. The sound drifted up through the vents like poison. I walked to my bedroom and opened my mother's armoire. Solid oak, hand-carved in Warsaw in 1898. My grandmother had brought it to America with almost nothing else. My mother had kept her most precious possessions in it. And now I would fill it with the evidence that would save my son from himself. I pulled out the first folder. Bank statements from the past 6 months showing wire transfers Adrian had made without authorization. I'd known about them for weeks, but had said nothing. I added his emails to Sloan, recovered from the family computer server where they discussed accelerating access to the funds before the old woman catches on. Old woman. He'd called me an old woman. I was 57 years old, ran marathons, sat on 3 corporate boards, and could still negotiate circles around men half my age. But to my son, I was just an old woman in the way of his inheritance. I added more documents. The altered POA papers. I'd already obtained the originals from Harold's office through a discreet phone call where I'd explained that I wanted to review the language. The real documents showed limited authority. The ones Adrian had showed me had been modified. Fraud. Clear, prosecutable fraud. By midnight, the armoire was organized like a war room. Every document labeled, dated, cross-referenced. Margaret was right. When the time came, this would be undeniable. I heard footsteps in the hallway and quickly closed the armoire doors. Adrian appeared in my doorway, slightly drunk from the champagne. Mom. His voice was softer now. The bravado from earlier dissolved in alcohol. Are you okay? I looked at my son, really looked at him. I saw Thomas in his jawline, saw my own eyes looking back at me, saw the little boy who used to bring me dandelions and call them gold, and I saw the man he'd become. Weak, manipulated, lost. I'm fine, Adrian. Good night. He hesitated, like he wanted to say something else, but then Sloane's voice called from their room, sharp, demanding, and he left. I locked my bedroom door that night for the first time in 23 years of living in this house. And as I lay in the darkness, I made myself a promise. My son had declared war without knowing he'd challenged a woman who'd spent 3 decades winning battles in rooms full of predators much more dangerous than Sloan Mercer. He wanted everything I'd built? Fine. Let him think he had it. And then I'd show him exactly what it meant to betray Isabel Ravencroft. The game had just begun. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Instead, I lay in the darkness and let myself remember everything. The whole journey that had led to this moment where my own son could stand in my study and tell me I deserved nothing but a coffin. I was born Isabel Kowalski in a 2-bedroom apartment in Bridgeport, Connecticut, where the smell of my mother's pierogi mixed with the scent of industrial cleaning chemicals she brought home on her clothes every night. My father worked double shifts at a manufacturing plant, and my mother cleaned offices from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. I grew up knowing exactly what the edge of poverty looked like, how it felt to wear the same 3 outfits to school on rotation. how it sounded when my parents argued in hushed Polish about which bill to pay first. I was 17 when I decided I would never live like that again. I earned a full scholarship to the University of Connecticut, majored in finance, and worked 3 part-time jobs to cover what the scholarship didn't. That's where I met Thomas Ravencroft. He was in the architecture program, tall and kind with hands that could sketch buildings that looked like dreams. His family had money, old Connecticut money, the kind that came with a family crest and a genealogy that traced back to the Mayflower. His mother, Elise, took one look at me, and I could see exactly what she was thinking. The cleaning lady's daughter isn't good enough for my son. But Thomas loved me anyway. We married 6 months after graduation in a small ceremony that his family attended with forced smiles and my parents attended with tears of joy. His mother gave us a check for $20,000 as a wedding gift, and I knew what it really meant. Here's money to go away and not embarrass us. I used that money as seed capital for my consulting firm instead. Thomas supported my ambition, even when his family didn't understand it. While he built his architecture practice, designing innovative commercial buildings, I built Ravencroft Financial Consulting from the ground up. I specialized in corporate restructuring and merger advisory, and I was good at it. Better than good. I could walk into a failing company, identify the bleeding points, and create turnaround strategies that actually worked. By the time I was 35, my firm was handling 9-figure deals. Adrian was born when I was 25. I went into labor during a client presentation and finished the pitch before going to the hospital. Thomas used to joke that our son was born with perfect timing, always knew when to make an entrance. Adrian was everything we'd hoped for, healthy, bright, curious. We gave him everything I'd never had growing up. The best schools, music lessons, summer camps in Switzerland, tutors for any subject he struggled with. Maybe that was the problem. I remembered Adrian at 6 years old, crying because another boy had a bigger Lego set. Instead of telling him to be grateful for what he had, I bought him an even bigger set. At 10, he punched a classmate and was suspended. I hired a child psychologist and smoothed things over with the school board. No permanent record. At 15, he crashed the Mercedes I'd bought him for his birthday. I had it repaired and replaced without consequence. Every single time he fell, I caught him. Thomas saw it happening. We fought about it more than once. "Isabel, you're not helping him," he'd say. "You're teaching him that nothing has consequences." But I'd grown up with too many consequences, with every mistake meaning we might not eat that week or keep the lights on. I couldn't stand to see Adrian suffer the way I had, so I fixed everything. When Adrian was 22 and dropped out of his MBA program at Columbia after 1 semester, I didn't push back. He said business school was stifling his entrepreneurial spirit. I wrote it off as youthful idealism. When he started his first company, a social media app that promised to revolutionize how Gen Z communicates, I invested $250,000. The app launched, got 17 users, and died within 6 months. Thomas tried to talk to me. Let him fail, Isabel. Let him learn. But I couldn't. I was too proud. I'd built an empire from nothing. Surely I could guide my son to success. So when Adrian started his second company, a boutique coffee subscription service, I invested another $150,000. That one lasted 8 months before collapsing under basic operational costs Adrian hadn't bothered to calculate. Then Thomas died. Heart attack at 62, sudden and devastating. One moment he was sketching at his drafting table. The next, he was gone. I found him there, pencil still in his hand, drawing of a museum edition he'd been designing still incomplete on the paper. I fell apart. For 6 months I barely functioned. Adrian was 27 then, and I remember thinking he'd step up, help carry the weight of our grief together. Instead, he seemed almost angry at me for mourning. "You need to move on, Mom," he'd say. "Dad wouldn't want you falling apart like this." But what he really meant was, "Your grief is inconvenient for me." I didn't see it then. I was too destroyed by losing Thomas, too desperate to keep our family together. So when Adrian said he wanted to honor his father's memory by starting a third company, architectural design software for small firms, I gave him $300,000. Thomas would have wanted me to support our son's dreams, I told myself. That company lasted 10 months. After Thomas died, something shifted in Adrian. He started making comments about how I was too controlling, how I needed to let go and trust him more. Looking back now, I could see how I'd been manipulated. Every time I'd hesitated about funding another venture or questioned his decisions, he'd invoke Thomas's memory. "Dad believed in me," he'd say. "Don't you?" Of course I did. He was my son, my only child, all I had left of Thomas. So last year, when I had that health scare, the heart arrhythmia that turned out to be stress-induced and manageable, Adrian suggested I sign power of attorney papers just in case. Harold Pemberton, my estate attorney, had drawn them up with very specific limitations. Limited authority to handle banking if I was incapacitated or unavailable. That's what the document said. I signed them because I trusted my son. That was 14 months ago. 6 months ago, Sloane appeared. I first met her at Adrian's apartment in Manhattan, a 2-bedroom I was paying for because his consulting income wasn't enough to cover rent in the city. She was beautiful in that artificial Instagram way. Perfect hair with obvious extensions, lips plumped with filler, wearing head-to-toe designer clothes that I later learned were mostly rented for her social media posts. "Mrs. Ravencroft," she'd gushed, hugging me like we were old friends. "Adrian has told me so much about you. Your story is so inspiring. From nothing to everything. That's the kind of success I want to achieve." I'd smiled politely, but something felt off. The way she looked at the Cartier watch on my wrist, the way she asked casual questions about property values in Greenwich, the way she touched Adrian's arm possessively whenever I spoke to him directly. Margaret met her 2 weeks later at a dinner I hosted. In the car afterward, Margaret said, "That girl is trouble, Isabel. She's calculating everything. I saw her literally taking notes in her phone about your jewelry." "You're being paranoid," I'd said. "Am I? Did you see how she steered every conversation back to money? How she positioned herself as Adrian's business partner when he's never mentioned her involvement in any project?" I'd dismissed Margaret's concerns. My son was 32 years old. He could date whoever he wanted, and Sloane seemed to make him happy, more confident, more driven. He started talking about finally getting serious about his career. What I didn't know was that Sloane was getting serious about my money. The engagement announcement came 4 months ago. Adrian brought Sloane to Sunday dinner and showed me the ring, a 4-carat diamond that I recognized from an estate jewelry auction I'd attended with Margaret. That ring cost $95,000. I knew because I'd considered bidding on it myself. "Where did you get the money for that?" I'd asked Adrian privately. "I've been saving," he said, not meeting my eyes, "and Sloane's family contributed." Later, I'd discover he'd taken a cash advance against one of the credit cards I'd given him for emergencies. Sloane's family hadn't contributed anything. Her parents were middle-class folks from Ohio who had no idea their daughter was passing herself off as an heiress online. The wedding was planned for next spring. Sloane had already booked the plaza in New York for the reception, 300 guests, estimated cost $450,000. When I gently suggested something smaller, more intimate, Sloane had gotten teary-eyed. "I've dreamed of this my whole life, Isabel. Adrian said you'd understand. You came from nothing too, right? So you know what it's like to finally have the chance for something beautiful." She was good. I'd give her that. She knew exactly how to frame things to make me the villain if I objected. Over the past 6 months, I'd watched Adrian change. The guilt and shame he'd carried about his business failures transformed into resentment toward me. Sloane would make little comments when she thought I couldn't hear. "Your mother doesn't respect you as a man, Adrian. She still sees you as a child. Or she built all this wealth. But what's the point if she won't share it with the people she's supposed to love?" She poisoned him, slowly, methodically, and I'd let it happen because I didn't want to lose my son. Every time I considered confronting the situation, I'd remember that I was all Adrian had left. Without Thomas, without his father's guidance, surely he needed his mother's support more than ever. I'd been wrong. What Adrian needed was consequences, boundaries, the hard lessons I'd spent his entire life protecting him from. And now, at 32 years old, he'd never learned that actions have repercussions, that money must be earned, that family loyalty runs both ways. Thomas had tried to tell me. My mother had tried to warn me in her gentle way before she died 8 years ago. Even Margaret had been saying it for years, but I hadn't listened. I'd been too busy trying to give Adrian the easy life I'd never had, never realizing I was actually stealing his chance to become a man capable of standing on his own. Now, here we were. My son had committed fraud to steal my life's work, and instead of grief, I felt something colder settle in my chest. Determination. Adrian wanted to learn the hard way? Fine. I'd survived poverty, sexism in corporate boardrooms, my husband's death, and my mother-in-law's contempt. I'd negotiated with CEOs who thought they could intimidate me, restructured companies everyone said were beyond saving, and built a $42 million fortune from that $20,000 insult check. My son had no idea who he was dealing with, but he was about to learn. The next morning, I woke to the sound of voices downstairs, loud celebratory voices. I checked my phone, 7:15 a.m. I got dressed carefully, choosing a simple gray cashmere sweater and slacks. No jewelry except my wedding ring. I needed to look subdued, defeated even. Let them think I'd accepted my fate. When I came downstairs, Adrian and Sloane were in the dining room with a man I didn't recognize. Papers were spread across the table where I usually had my morning coffee. My grandmother's table, the one piece of furniture my mother had insisted on bringing from Poland. Mom. Adrian looked up, and I saw something flicker in his eyes. Guilt, maybe, or just discomfort. This is Richard Lawson from First National. We're just finalizing some account transfers. I see. I moved toward the kitchen. I'll just get coffee and stay out of your way. Actually, Sloane's voice cut through the air like a knife. We're using the kitchen this morning for catering setup. I'm having some people over later to celebrate our engagement properly. You don't mind eating in the breakfast nook, do you? The breakfast nook. The small table near the laundry room where the housekeeper usually ate. I felt heat rise in my chest, but I pushed it down. Of course not. I spent that morning in the breakfast nook with instant coffee. The expensive beans I'd ordered from a roaster in Seattle were apparently being saved for Sloane's party. Through the wall, I could hear them laughing, making calls, planning. At one point, Sloane's voice carried clearly, "I'm thinking we redecorate the entire first floor. All this dark wood is so dated. We need light, airy, modern." That dark wood was mahogany Thomas and I had selected together on our 15th anniversary trip to Brazil. Every panel, every beam had a memory attached. I pulled out my phone and texted Margaret. It started. Her response was immediate. "Document everything. I'm getting the PI reports today." PI reports. Margaret had hired a private investigator the day after our conversation. If Sloane had secrets, and Margaret was convinced she did, we'd find them. The party that night was torture. Sloane had invited 40 people, mostly influencer friends and social climbers I'd never met. They filled my living room, drinking my wine, eating catered food that cost more than my mother made in a month of cleaning offices. I stayed in my room until Sloane knocked on my door around 8. "Isabel?" Her voice was syrupy sweet. "Won't you come down? Some people would love to meet Adrian's mother." She made it sound like I was a museum piece. Adrian's mother, the old woman who used to be relevant. I went downstairs because refusing would have been a scene. And I needed to not make scenes. I needed to be invisible, forgettable, pathetic even. Let them underestimate me. The living room was packed with 20-somethings holding champagne flutes and posing for photos. Sloane immediately grabbed my arm and pulled me toward a cluster of her friends. "Everyone, this is Isabel. She built a consulting empire from nothing. Total girl boss energy, right? Girl boss energy. I'd negotiated billion-dollar mergers, and she'd reduced my life's work to a social media buzzword." One of her friends, a girl who couldn't have been older than 25, looked me up and down. "Oh my God. I love that you're still working at your age. That's so inspirational. Most women retire and just give up, you know?" I smiled tightly. "I sold my firm 3 years ago, actually." "Oh." The girl's interest evaporated instantly. "So you're retired. Cool, cool." Sloane steered me away, her nails digging slightly into my arm. "Why don't you tell people you're retired, Isabel? It makes you sound so settled." Settled. Another word for old, irrelevant, finished. I excused myself after 20 minutes and went back upstairs. From my bedroom window, I watched them through the reflection in the glass doors below. Sloane was the center of attention, showing off her ring, telling stories that painted her as Adrian's business partner and emotional support. Adrian stood beside her, smiling, accepting congratulations. No one mentioned me again. Around midnight, after the party ended, I heard them coming up the stairs. Their bedroom was in the east wing now. They'd moved into the master suite 2 weeks ago. My master suite, the one Thomas and I had shared for 18 years. Did you see everyone's faces when I showed them the place? Sloane's voice carried through the walls. This is exactly the lifestyle I'm meant for. Your mother was so weird tonight, though, just lurking in the corner. She's processing everything, Adrian said, and I heard defensiveness in his voice. This is a big change for her. She needs to process faster. I'm not spending the next year tiptoeing around her feelings. This is our house now. Our house. I pressed my hand against the wall I'd chosen paint colors for, that I'd had reinforced when we renovated, that held pictures of my family's history. Our house. I opened my mother's armoire and added notes from tonight to the growing file. Guest list, catering receipts I'd photographed, recordings from the small device Margaret had helped me install in common areas. All legal. Connecticut was a one-party consent state for recordings, and it was my house. Every cruel comment, every dismissive gesture, every penny spent was being documented. The next few weeks were systematic humiliation. Sloane redecorated the living room without asking, replacing Thomas's architectural sketches with generic modern art she'd ordered online. She hired an interior designer who kept referring to the existing furniture as grandmother chic that needed to go. When I objected to removing a particular chair, the reading chair where I'd nursed Adrian as a baby, Sloane had it moved to the basement to make room for the new sectional. My credit cards were canceled. Adrian explained it apologetically. We're consolidating finances, more efficient this way. If you need anything, just ask. Ask, like I was a child requesting an allowance. I asked for grocery money, $50 for basic supplies. Sloane handed me 2 20s. That should be enough, right? You don't eat that much anyway. I started buying the cheapest coffee, the generic brands I remembered from childhood. Not because I had to, but because I needed to feel the humiliation, let it fuel what was coming. Margaret visited one afternoon and nearly exploded. Isabel, this is abuse, financial abuse. You need to stop this now. Not yet, I said quietly. We were in my bedroom, the only space I still controlled. The PI reports, did they come? Margaret's face shifted to something like satisfaction. She pulled out a folder. Oh, they came. Sloane Mercer is very interesting. Born Sloane McCarthy in Dayton, Ohio. Father's a mechanic, mother's a dental hygienist. Nice people, actually. They have no idea their daughter is pretending to be from money. What else? $95,000 in credit card debt across 7 cards. She's been paying minimums for 3 years. Gets money from various boyfriends. That's in quotes because the investigator found evidence she's been running this con for at least 5 years. Adrian's number 4. The previous 3 all had family money she tried to access. One filed a restraining order. I felt cold settle deeper in my chest. Adrian doesn't know any of this. Of course not. She's a professional. Look at this. Margaret showed me social media posts dating back 6 years. Different men, different luxury locations, same pattern. Sloane would date someone wealthy, post constantly about their lifestyle, then suddenly the posts would stop. She ghosts them when the money runs out or they catch on. But she's never gotten this far before. You made it easy. You gave Adrian access to funds. She doesn't need to manipulate him into small payments anymore. She's going for the whole thing. The prenup Harold mentioned, already drafted. Adrian doesn't know yet, but Sloane's lawyer drew it up. She gets 60% of all assets acquired during the marriage, including inheritances. If they divorce any time in the first 10 years, she walks away with millions. And Isabel, there's more. Margaret's face was grim. The PI picked up conversations between Sloane and her lawyer. They were discussing how to accelerate the timeline. Those were the words used. My blood went cold. Accelerate how? The lawyer mentioned that inheritance laws are clearer when there's only one heir. No competing claims from, and I'm quoting here, the elderly mother. Elderly mother. I was 57 years old, ran 5 miles every morning, and had the health of someone 15 years younger. But to Sloane, I was an obstacle that could be removed. Did they specify? No. It was vague enough to give them deniability. But Isabel, this woman is dangerous. Not just greedy, actually dangerous. We need to act now. Not yet. I looked at the armoire, now stuffed with evidence. I need Adrian to see it himself. If I just present evidence, Sloan will convince him I fabricated it, that I'm a bitter old woman trying to destroy his happiness. He needs to discover the truth himself. How? She's getting comfortable, making mistakes. She'll slip, and when she does, Adrian will be watching. I didn't have to wait long. 3 days later, I was in the breakfast nook, my permanent spot now, when Adrian came in, looking shaken. He sat down across from me without speaking, just stared at the table. "What's wrong?" I asked quietly. "I was looking for the title to the Range Rover. Sloan wants to sell it and get a Bentley." I went through the desk in our room and found. He trailed off, then pulled out papers. "These credit card statements, they're in Sloan's name. Mom, she has $95,000 in debt. She told me her family paid for everything, that she had money. I wanted to say I told you so. I wanted to scream. Instead, I just nodded. What are you going to do?" I confronted her. She said it was from business investments, that she's building her brand, that I don't understand influencer economics. He looked up at me, and I saw the boy I'd raised, confused and scared. "But Mom, these statements go back 3 years, minimum payments, and some of the charges are weird. Luxury hotels in different cities, always right before she posts about being with friends. But I checked her location history on our shared phone plan. She was alone. My heart rate picked up. He was starting to see it. Finally, "Adrian, I need to tell you something, but I need you to hear me out without getting defensive." "What?" "Margaret had Sloan investigated. Before you get angry, I did it because I love you and something felt wrong. The investigator found things you need to see." His face hardened. "You had my fiancé investigated? That's insane, Mom. That's controlling, and she's conned 3 other men in the past 5 years. One filed a restraining order. Her real name is Sloan McCarthy from Dayton, Ohio. Her parents are good people with modest means. She's been lying about everything. You're lying. You've never liked her. I have proof, photos, legal documents, interviews with previous victims. Adrian, she has a lawyer who drafted a prenup that gives her 60% of all your assets, including inheritance. And there are recorded conversations about accelerating access to my money by removing obstacles, meaning me." He stood up so fast his chair fell over. "This is insane. You're making this up because you can't stand that I'm happy, that I found someone, that I don't need you anymore. You used fraudulent documents to steal my money, Adrian. The power of attorney you used was altered. I have the originals from Harold's office. What you did is illegal. It's called financial fraud, and it carries 5 to 10 years in federal prison." His face went white. "I didn't alter anything. Harold gave me those papers. He said they were standard. Harold gave you limited power of attorney. Someone changed the language. Who had access to those papers besides you?" I watched realization dawn on his face. "Sloan said she'd take them to a lawyer friend to make sure everything was valid. She had them for 2 days before we went to the bank. She altered them, Adrian. She committed fraud using your name. And when this falls apart, you're the one who will go to prison, not her. She's been very careful to make sure everything is in your name." He sank back into his chair. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, quietly, "What do I do?" "Tonight, Sloan thinks you're going to dinner with her friends. Instead, you're going to tell her you need to work late. Then you're going to search your bedroom thoroughly. Her laptop, her phone if you can access it, any papers she keeps private. You're going to see who she really is. And Adrian, you're going to check that armoire in my room. The oak one that belonged to your great-grandmother. Why? Because that's where I've been keeping evidence. Not just about Sloan, about everything. Every forged signature, every fraudulent transfer, every conversation. I've been documenting this since the day you told me I deserved nothing but a coffin." He flinched at those words. "Mom, I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did. In that moment, you meant it. Because she'd convinced you that I was your enemy, instead of the woman who gave up sleep to rock you through nightmares, who sat through every parent-teacher conference, who paid for every failure and celebrated every small success. She convinced you I was the problem." Tears were running down his face now. "I'm so sorry. God, Mom, I'm so sorry. What have I done?" "You've made mistakes, bad ones. The question is what you do now." I reached across the table and took his hand. The first time I'd touched my son with affection in weeks. "Tonight, you find the truth. Then tomorrow, You decide who you want to be. The man who lets himself be manipulated into destroying his own mother, or the man who faces consequences and rebuilds. He left the breakfast nook shaking. I returned to my room and sat by the window, watching the afternoon light fade over the gardens. This was the turning point. Either Adrian would find the truth himself, and we'd have a chance at rebuilding our relationship, or Sloane would convince him I'd fabricated everything and I'd lose my son forever. My phone buzzed. Margaret. Everything ready? Me. He's searching tonight. Margaret. I'll be on standby. This could go either way, Isabel. I knew that. I'd known it from the beginning. But I also knew something else. I hadn't built a $42 million fortune by backing down when things got hard. I'd built it by making strategic decisions and seeing them through, no matter how painful. Tonight, Adrian would open that armoire, and tomorrow, everything would change. I didn't sleep. Again. I sat in the chair by my bedroom window, watching the driveway, waiting for headlights that would signal Sloane's return. Adrian had texted me at 8:30. She left for dinner. I'm searching now. That was 2 hours ago. At 10:45, my bedroom door opened quietly. Adrian stood there, his face destroyed. In his hands were stacks of papers, a laptop, and Sloane's phone. He'd been crying. His eyes were red and swollen. Mom. His voice cracked. Can I come in? I nodded and turned on the lamp beside my chair. He came in and sat on the floor at my feet like he used to do as a child when he was upset. For a moment, we just sat in silence. I found everything, he finally said. The credit card statements were just the beginning. She has emails, Mom. Dozens of them. To other men while she's been with me, promising them the same things she promised me. And there's this document, a plan. That's what she called it. The Ravencroft Plan. It has timelines, goals, strategies. He opened the laptop and turned it toward me. I read the document on the screen, and even though I'd expected something bad, the clinical calculation of it made me feel sick. Phase 1. Establish relationship with Adrian Ravencroft. Build emotional dependency through validation and sexual availability. Timeline. 3 to 4 months. Phase 2. Isolate from family support, specifically Mother Isabel Ravencroft. Plant seeds of resentment about maternal control and infantilization. Timeline. 2 to 3 months. Phase 3. Secure engagement and access to family finances. Utilize Adrian's existing power of attorney documents. Modify if necessary for full access. Timeline. 1 to 2 months. Phase 4. Accelerate wedding timeline. Implement prenuptial agreement securing 60% of marital assets, including inheritance. Timeline. 6 to 8 months. Phase 5. Complete asset transfer. Remove remaining obstacles to full financial control. Phase 5, Adrian whispered. There are notes in the margins. Elderly women have accidents, falls, medication errors, stress-induced health events. Mom, she was planning to kill you. I felt oddly calm hearing it confirmed. Maybe because I'd suspected for weeks, or maybe because it was almost a relief to know I wasn't paranoid. There's more, Adrian continued. I found her real phone. She's been using 2. One for me and the legitimate stuff, another for everything else. She's been communicating with a man named Derek Chen. He's some kind of identity theft specialist. They were planning to drain your account systematically after the wedding, then frame me for it if things went wrong. Frame you? Everything's in my name, Mom. Every transfer, every altered document, every fraudulent signature. She made sure of it. If this went to court, I'd be the one going to prison. She has screenshots, recordings, emails, all showing me as the mastermind and her as the innocent girlfriend who had no idea. He handed me the second phone. I scrolled through messages between Sloane and this Derek person. The conversations were shockingly casual about committing serious crimes. Derek. The old lady suspect anything yet? Sloane. No, she's pathetic, honestly. Just moping around letting us take everything. Once I'm legally married and we trigger phase 5, it'll be over in days. Derek. And the son? Sloane. Useful idiot. He actually thinks I love him. Men are so easy when you tell them their mommy was mean to them. I looked up at Adrian. His face was twisted with pain and humiliation. I'm so stupid, he said. I destroyed everything for someone who literally called me a useful idiot. I threatened you, my own mother, told you that you deserved nothing but a coffin, and for what? For a con artist who was planning to frame me for fraud and probably murder? You're not stupid, I said quietly. You're inexperienced, sheltered. I did that to you. I never let you fail hard enough to develop judgment about people's true intentions. Sloane is a professional predator, Adrian. She's done this before to men older and more worldly than you. That doesn't excuse what I did to you. He was crying again, really crying now. I told you that you deserve nothing but a coffin. Jesus, Mom, what kind of person says that to their mother? The woman who gave me everything, who never stopped supporting me even when I failed over and over again. The kind of person who's been manipulated by an expert. I reached down and put my hand on his head like I used to when he was small. But Adrian, we need to focus now. Where is Sloane? Still at dinner. She thinks I'm working late. She won't be back until midnight at least. She likes to post late-night vibes content. Okay, go to my armoire. Open it. He stood up, walked to the large oak armoire, and pulled open the doors. His face went slack as he took in the contents. Folders organized by date and type, each labeled clearly. Bank statements, forged documents, email transcripts, recorded conversations, legal analyses, private investigator reports, photos of Sloane with other men taken within the past 6 months. You knew, he said. This whole time, you knew everything and you just let it happen? I needed you to see it yourself. If I'd shown you evidence 3 weeks ago, what would you have done? He was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. I would have thought you fabricated it. Sloane would have convinced me you were a controlling mother trying to destroy my happiness. I would have chosen her over you. Exactly. You needed to discover the truth yourself, to see who she really is without my influence, because Adrian, this isn't just about Sloane. This is about you learning something crucial. Actions have consequences, and some mistakes can't be fixed with money. What do I do now? I stood up and faced my son. Now, we set the trap. Sloane thinks she's won. She thinks you're the weak link, and I'm the broken old woman. We're going to use that. When she comes home tonight, you're going to act normal. Maybe a little worried about money. That'll make her feel secure. Tomorrow, you're going to tell her you want to move up the wedding date. You're so excited that you can't wait. Why would I? Because rushing her will make her sloppy. She'll push to finalize the prenup immediately, probably pressure you to sign without reading it carefully. That's when we catch her. We'll have Margaret present as a family lawyer just reviewing standard documents. Margaret will spot the fraud, the altered terms, everything. We'll have witnesses, recordings, undeniable proof. And then, Adrian, you're going to give Sloane a choice. What choice? Prison or disappearance? She returns every single thing she's taken, signs a confession, agrees to leave Connecticut permanently, and never contact our family again. In exchange, we don't press charges. She walks away with her freedom and nothing else. Adrian was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. Mom, that's ruthless. I negotiated billion-dollar mergers with men who thought I was just a secretary, Adrian. I survived your grandmother Elise, trying to pay me to divorce your father. I built an empire from nothing while people bet on my failure. Ruthless is what I do when someone threatens my family. I paused. But there's something else we need to discuss. What you did was also illegal. You used fraudulent documents to access my accounts. You made threats. Technically, you've committed crimes too. His face went white again. Are you going to press charges against me? That depends on you, on who you choose to be from this moment forward. The boy who never faces consequences, or the man who rebuilds himself through accountability. What do you want me to do? Tomorrow, after we deal with Sloane, you're going to do 3 things. First, you're going to enter a residential program for gambling addiction. Yes, I know about the debts. Second, you're going to start therapy, real therapy with someone who specializes in family dynamics and entitled behavior. Third, you're going to get a job. A real job that you find yourself, that pays you based on your actual work, not your last name. And if I do all that, then we rebuild, slowly. You'll have access to a trust fund, $500,000 administered by independent managers until you can prove 5 consecutive years of employment and financial stability. No access to my other accounts, No power of attorney, no shortcuts. You build your own life, your own way. And maybe, eventually, we can be mother and son again instead of victim and criminal. He closed his eyes, tears still streaming down his face. I don't deserve this chance. No, you don't. But I'm your mother, and apparently I still can't stop protecting you from total destruction. This is the last time, Adrian. The very last time I catch you when you fall. From now on, you climb back up yourself. I understand. Downstairs, we heard the front door open. Sloane's voice called out, "Adrian? Baby, are you home?" Adrian and I locked eyes. He quickly wiped his face, grabbed Sloane's laptop and phone, and headed for the door. "Remember," I whispered, "act normal. She can't know we know." He nodded and left my room. I heard him go downstairs, heard Sloane's delighted laugh as she told him about dinner, heard him say something about being tired. I sat back down in my chair and looked at the armoire, still hanging open, stuffed with evidence of betrayal and calculation. Tomorrow, we would spring the trap. Tomorrow, Sloane Mercer would learn what happens when you threaten Isabel Ravencroft. Tomorrow, my son would begin learning how to be a man. But tonight, I just sat in the darkness and let myself feel everything I'd been suppressing for weeks. The hurt, the betrayal, the fierce protective love that had made me document instead of destroy, that had made me give my son one more chance instead of calling the police that very first day. Tomorrow would be war, but tonight was grief. The next morning, I woke to the sound of Adrian's voice downstairs, loud, excited, convincing. He was playing his part perfectly. "Sloane, I've been thinking. Why wait until spring? Let's get married next month. I don't want to spend another day without you being my wife." I got dressed slowly, listening to her response through the vents. "Next month? Baby, that's so sudden. We haven't even finalized the prenup yet, and the venue, forget the plaza. We can do something intimate here at the house. 50 people, just close friends and family. And the prenup, let's get that signed today. I don't want anything standing in our way." I heard the calculation in her pause. She was weighing whether this was suspicious or just Adrian being impulsive like always. "I love that energy," she finally said. "Okay, let me call my lawyer. We can probably get everything finalized by this afternoon." "Perfect," I texted Margaret. "She's calling her lawyer. Be here by 2 p.m. Margaret, "On my way. Harold's coming too. We've got everything ready." I went downstairs at 9. Adrian was in the kitchen making breakfast, something he hadn't done in weeks. Sloane was on the phone in the living room, her voice bright and sharp as she coordinated with her lawyer. "Mom." Adrian handed me a cup of coffee. The good coffee, not the generic instant I'd been drinking. "I made eggs." Sloane came back in, all smiles. "Isabel, Adrian tells me you're okay with us having the wedding here. That's so generous. I promise we'll make it beautiful." "Of course," I said quietly. "I just want Adrian to be happy." She beamed at me like I was a child who'd finally learned to behave. "My lawyer can come at 2. We'll get the prenup signed, and then we can start planning properly. This is so exciting." The hours until 2 p.m. crawled by. Sloane was on her phone constantly, calling caterers and florists and photographers. Adrian stayed close to me, his hand shaking slightly whenever he held his coffee cup. At one point, when Sloane went upstairs to change, he whispered, "What if she doesn't fall for it?" "She will," I said. "She thinks she's already won. That makes people careless." At 1:55, the doorbell rang. Margaret arrived first, dressed in a sharp navy suit, carrying a leather briefcase. She looked every inch the corporate lawyer she was. "Ms. Ravencroft," she said formally, shaking my hand. "Thank you for allowing me to review these documents on behalf of the family." Harold Pemberton arrived 2 minutes later, equally professional. Sloane came down the stairs looking confused. "Adrian, what's going on? I thought this was just signing papers." "It is," Adrian said smoothly. "But Mom's lawyer wanted to review everything first. Standard family protocol. My dad always said never sign anything without legal review." I saw Sloane's jaw tighten, but she couldn't object without looking suspicious. "Of course, that's smart." At 2:15, Sloane's lawyer arrived. Bradley Thornton, a man in his late 40s with slicked back hair and an expensive suit that didn't quite hide the predatory gleam in his eyes. The kind of lawyer who specialized in exploiting legal loopholes. We all gathered in the dining room, my grandmother's table now covered with legal documents. Thornton laid out the prenuptial agreement, and Margaret began reading through it slowly, while Harold took notes. The silence was heavy. Sloane kept glancing at her phone. Adrian sat perfectly still, playing the eager fiancé. I remained quiet, the defeated mother who'd accepted her diminished role. Finally, Margaret looked up. This is interesting language here in Section 7, subsection C. It states that all assets acquired during the marriage, including but not limited to inheritance, gifts, and trust distributions, are considered marital property subject to the 60-40 split in favor of Ms. Mercer. Is that correct, Mr. Thornton? That's standard modern prenup language, Thornton said smoothly. It's really not, Margaret said. Standard language protects premarital assets and inheritance. This language specifically includes inheritance as divisible marital property. That's highly unusual, and I'd argue, potentially unconscionable. Sloane laughed lightly. Adrian and I want a real partnership. We don't believe in his money and my money. It's our money. How generous of you, Margaret said, considering you're bringing $95,000 in undisclosed debt to this partnership. The room went very still. Sloane's smile froze. Excuse me? You heard me. $95,000 across 7 credit cards, all in your name, all conveniently omitted from the financial disclosure you signed as part of this prenup. Margaret pulled out a folder. These are your actual credit statements, obtained legally through public record searches. Mr. Thornton, your client committed fraud by failing to disclose material debts in a prenuptial agreement. That makes this entire contract void. Thornton's face went pale. I was told she had no debts. Your client lied to you, Harold said, speaking for the first time. Just as she lied to Adrian about numerous things, including her real name. What? Adrian did an excellent job of looking shocked. What are you talking about? I stood up and walked to the armoire in the corner of the dining room. I'd moved key files there this morning. I opened it and pulled out the private investigator's report. Her name isn't Sloane Mercer, I said. It's Sloane McCarthy. She's from Dayton, Ohio. Her parents are a mechanic and a dental hygienist. Lovely people, by the way. We spoke with them yesterday. They had no idea their daughter was pretending to be from wealth or that she's engaged. They thought she was working in marketing in New York. Sloane stood up abruptly. This is insane. You hired investigators? That's harassment. It's due diligence, Margaret said calmly. And it gets better. Ms. McCarthy has engaged in this pattern before. 3 times in the past 5 years, she's targeted men from wealthy families. One of them, Jonathan Presley, filed a restraining order after she attempted to access his trust fund through forged documents. Sound familiar? I pulled out more papers. These are the power of attorney documents you altered, Sloane. The ones you took to your lawyer friend for 2 days. Harold has the originals. You changed the language from limited banking authority to full financial power of attorney. That's forgery. That's fraud. Adrian stood up slowly, and now he let his real emotions show. You told me those papers were legal. You said Harold had approved them. Adrian, baby, let me explain. Explain this. He pulled out her laptop and opened it to the document I'd seen last night. The Ravencroft Plan, Phase 1 through Phase 5, including notes about how elderly women have accidents and how to remove remaining obstacles. That obstacle was my mother, Sloane. You were planning to kill her. Thornton was already gathering his papers. I had no knowledge of any of this, Ms. McCarthy. Our professional relationship is terminated effective immediately. Wait! Sloane's voice was panicked now. Bradley, don't... They're making this up. I'm afraid not, Harold said. He pulled out another device, a small recording unit. Connecticut is a one-party consent state for recordings. Isabel has been documenting everything that happens in her home for the past 3 weeks, including conversations between you and Adrian about getting rid of the old woman, about making sure everything looks like natural causes, and about how you'd frame Adrian for financial crimes if things went wrong. I pressed play on one of the recordings. Sloane's voice came through clearly. Once we're married and I have legal access, we need to work fast. The old lady's health isn't great. We just need to help it along. A fall down the stairs, wrong medication dosage, something stress-induced. Then it's all ours, and the stupid boy takes the fall if anyone investigates. The color drained from Sloane's face. In that moment, I saw the real person underneath the Instagram filter. A cold, calculating woman who'd bet everything on one big score and just realized she'd lost. "That recording is illegal," she started. "It's not," Margaret said. "One-party consent." Isabel consented to recording conversations in her own home. Perfectly legal. And we have dozens more just like it. Sloane looked at Adrian, and I saw her try one last manipulation. Tears filled her eyes. "Adrian, baby, please. They're twisting everything. I love you. I would never—" "Stop." Adrian's voice was hard in a way I'd never heard before. "I found your other phone. I read your messages with Derek Chen. I saw the plans to drain my mother's accounts and frame me. I saw you calling me a useful idiot. I saw everything." Her tears dried up instantly. The mask dropped completely, and what was left was someone I barely recognized as human. "You went through my things? You had no right to try to murder my mother." Adrian's voice cracked. "You had no right to use me, manipulate me, turn me against the woman who gave me everything." Sloane turned to me, and now there was pure hatred in her eyes. "You think you're so smart, you old bitch? You think you won? I could still destroy both of you. I have evidence too. Text messages from Adrian talking about getting rid of you. Bank records showing transfers he authorized. He's just as guilty as I am." "Actually," Harold said, "Adrian came to us yesterday evening and provided a full confession. He's admitted to using fraudulent documents, to making threats, to accessing accounts illegally. He's agreed to make full restitution and face appropriate consequences. He's also agreed to testify against you in exchange for a plea arrangement." That wasn't entirely true. We hadn't worked out the details yet, but Sloane didn't know that. I watched her calculate, saw the moment she realized she had no leverage left. "What do you want?" she asked flatly. I walked closer to her. "You're going to return everything you've taken from this house. Every piece of jewelry, every designer item, every penny you've spent on my credit cards. You're going to sign a full confession detailing everything: the fraud, the forgery, the conspiracy, the planned murder. You're going to provide all communications with Derek Chen and anyone else involved in this scheme. And then you're going to leave Connecticut and never contact anyone in my family again. And if I don't, then we call the police right now. The evidence we have is enough for multiple felony charges: fraud, forgery, conspiracy to commit murder, identity theft. You'll go to prison for 10 to 15 years. Your pretty face won't last long there." Sloane's hands were shaking. "You can't prove conspiracy to commit murder. Those were just words, thoughts. You purchased a bottle of my mother's blood pressure medication," Adrian said quietly. "I found the pharmacy receipt in your bag. The medication I take. You were going to switch them, weren't you? Give her my pills, which would have been fatal with her heart condition." The silence was absolute. Even Thornton, who'd been edging toward the door, froze. "I want immunity," Sloane finally said. "Written immunity from prosecution." "No." Margaret's voice was steel. "You get a choice. Leave voluntarily with your freedom or leave in handcuffs. We're not negotiating. You have 30 seconds to decide." I watched Sloane's face cycle through emotions: rage, fear, calculation, resignation. Finally, she nodded. "Fine. I'll sign your confession. I'll leave. But I want that $15,000 you offered me before." "That offer expired," I said. "You get nothing. Except your freedom, which is more than you deserve." It took 2 hours to process everything. Sloane signed a 12-page confession that Margaret and Harold had prepared. She returned jewelry, designer clothes, electronics, everything she'd accumulated during her time here. The pile of items on the dining room table was staggering. At 6 p.m., a car arrived to take her to the airport. Margaret had arranged a one-way ticket to Los Angeles. Sloane walked out of my house with one suitcase and the clothes on her back. At the door, she turned back one last time. "You know what the funny thing is, Isabel? Adrian did want you dead. Maybe not as literally as I planned it, but he resented you. He hated being under your control. I didn't create those feelings. They were already there. I just used them." "You're right," I said. "Those feelings were there because I failed him as a parent. I gave him everything except the ability to stand on his own. But here's the difference between us, Sloane. I love my son enough to face that failure and fix it. You love only yourself, and that's why you'll always end up exactly where you are, alone with nothing." She left without another word. We watched her car disappear down the driveway. When the taillights faded, Adrian collapsed into a chair and put his head in his hands. "It's really over." "No," I said gently. "This part is over. Now comes the hard part. Now you face consequences and rebuild yourself." Margaret and Harold left shortly after, promising to finalize all the legal documentation. Adrian and I sat in the dining room as darkness fell outside. "I meant what I said last night," I told him. "Residential treatment program for the gambling, therapy for everything else, a real job that you earn yourself. And Adrian, you're moving out, not in anger, but because you need to learn to stand alone." "I understand." His voice was hoarse. "Mom, I know I don't deserve to ask this, but will you ever be able to forgive me? For what I said, what I did?" I thought about the coffin comment, about the cruelty, the weeks of humiliation, the moment I'd truly believed my only child wanted me dead. I thought about Thomas, about what he would say if he were here. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "Forgiveness isn't something you can demand or even earn quickly. It's something that might grow over time if you do the work, if you become someone worthy of it. Ask me again in 5 years, after you've proven you've changed." He nodded, tears streaming down his face. "That's fair. That's more than fair." We sat together in the dining room, mother and son, surrounded by the evidence of betrayal and the hope of redemption. Outside, the last light faded from the sky over Greenwich. The war was over. Now came the peace. Harder, slower, more painful than any battle. But possible. Finally possible. 3 months later, I stood in my study on a crisp October morning, looking out at gardens that were finally mine again. The house felt different now, quieter, cleaner, like something poisonous had been purged from the walls. Adrian had moved out 6 weeks ago into a modest 1-bedroom apartment in Stamford. He'd entered the residential treatment program the day after Sloan left, spent 30 days in intensive therapy, and came out different. Not healed, that would take years, but aware, present, accountable. He'd gotten a job 3 weeks ago. Nothing glamorous. Accounts manager at a small consulting firm in Hartford, making $65,000 a year. His first paycheck made him cry. "I've never earned money myself before," he'd told me on our weekly phone call. "Not really. Everything always came from you or from businesses that failed. This is different." We talked once a week, carefully, formally, like acquaintances learning to be friends. He'd asked to meet for coffee twice, and both times I'd said yes. The conversations were still stilted, but there were moments, brief flashes, where I saw the son I remembered. The boy who'd existed before entitlement and manipulation had twisted him into something unrecognizable. Margaret came over for lunch that afternoon. We sat in the breakfast nook. I'd reclaimed it, had it redecorated with bright curtains and new cushions. No more exiled to the corner like an unwanted guest. "Sloan surfaced in Los Angeles," Margaret said, scrolling through her phone. "Already engaged to some tech entrepreneur. Posted about it 2 weeks ago. Her story is that she's a survivor of family drama who's found her true love. Of course she has." I wasn't even angry. Sloan was what she was, a predator who'd moved on to new hunting grounds. "Did you send the confession to the Los Angeles authorities like we discussed?" "I did. They have it on file. If she tries this again, there's documentation. And I sent copies to 3 of her previous victims. They're comparing notes. There might be a civil case building." "Good. I meant it. Sloan deserved consequences, even if we'd chosen not to pursue criminal charges. Sometimes justice was slower, quieter, but still inevitable." Harold called that evening with news about the financial recovery. "Everything's been restored, Isabel. Every fraudulent transfer reversed, every account secured. I've also implemented new protocols. Any significant financial movement requires 2 signatures, multiple security verifications. What happened will never happen again. Thank you, Harold. And thank you for not telling Adrian those documents were legitimate when he first showed them to you. I couldn't lie, but I also couldn't betray attorney-client privilege by warning you directly. I'm glad you figured it out." After Harold hung up, I walked through the house slowly. The east wing had been completely redecorated, All traces of Sloane erased. Thomas's architectural sketches were back on the walls. My mother's furniture was back in place. The reading chair where I'd nursed Adrian was upstairs in my sitting room, reupholstered but recognizable. I stopped in front of my mother's armoire, still in my bedroom. The evidence was gone now, secured in Harold's office safe in case it was ever needed. But I'd kept one folder. Adrian's kindergarten drawings, elementary school report cards, photos from his childhood, reminders of who he'd been before I'd failed him, and who he might become again. My phone rang. Adrian's name appeared on the screen. "Mom? Is this an okay time?" "It's fine. What's going on?" "I just wanted to tell you, I got invited to a work event, a networking thing for young professionals, and I went. Without you, without any connections, just me. And I talked to people about what I do, about the work I'm actually doing with my own hands. Nobody knew who I was or where I came from. They just saw me. I heard something in his voice I'd never heard before. Pride. Real, earned pride. That's wonderful, Adrian. It felt good, Mom. Really good. I'm not saying I'm fixed or anything. Therapy is hard. Some days I still hate myself for what I did to you. But I'm learning that maybe I can be someone without your money defining me. You always could have been. I just never gave you the chance." There was a pause. Then, "Can I ask you something?" "Anything. Do you think Dad would have been ashamed of me for what I did?" I thought about Thomas, his kindness, his integrity, his gentle way of seeing the best in people. "I think your father would have been devastated by your choices, but I also think he would have been proud that you're trying to fix them. He always believed people could change if they wanted to badly enough. I want to. I really do want to change. I know you do. That's why I still answer when you call." After we hung up, I sat in the window seat and watched the sun set over Greenwich. The same view I'd had the night Adrian told me I deserved nothing but a coffin. But everything was different now. I'd learned something through all of this. Protecting my son from every failure hadn't been love. It had been fear. Fear that he'd suffer like I had, that he'd know the edge of poverty and desperation. But in trying to spare him pain, I'd denied him the growth that only comes through struggle. Thomas had known this. He'd tried to tell me for years, but I'd been so determined to give Adrian the easy life I'd never had that I'd forgotten the easy life had made me weak in some ways, strong in others. Struggle had taught me resilience. Consequences had taught me judgment. Failure had taught me humility. Adrian was learning those lessons now. Late, painfully, but learning them nonetheless. Margaret called the next morning with one final piece of news. Sloane's tech entrepreneur? He ran a background check, found our documentation. He broke off the engagement last night. Sloane's Instagram went private immediately. "Good," I said, and I meant it. Not out of vengeance, but out of a sense that justice, slow and imperfect, was still working. A week later, I had lunch with Adrian at a small cafe in Stamford, near his apartment. He looked different, thinner, tired, but somehow more solid, like he was finally inhabiting his own body instead of playing a role. "I've been thinking about something," he said over sandwiches that he'd insisted on paying for with his own money. "That night when I opened the armoire and saw everything you'd documented, I was terrified, ashamed, but also relieved." "Relieved?" "Because you could have destroyed me completely, sent me to prison, cut me off entirely, told everyone what I'd done. But you didn't. You gave me a choice, and I think that was the first time in my life someone trusted me to make the right choice myself, to face consequences and grow instead of running away." I felt tears prick my eyes. "You're making the right choices now. That's what matters. I want to pay you back. Every penny I stole, every penny I wasted. It'll take years, maybe decades, but I want to pay you back. Adrian, the trust fund I set up. I know. $500,000 if I prove 5 years of stability. But Mom, I don't want it. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I need to know I can stand on my own first. Otherwise, how am I any different than I was with Sloane?" I reached across the table and took my son's hand. "You're already different. You're already someone your father would recognize." His eyes filled with tears. "I miss him. I miss who I was when he was alive, before everything got so twisted. I miss him too. Every single day." We sat together in that cafe, mother and son starting over. Not from where we'd been. That was gone, burned away by betrayal and consequence. but from something new, something earned. That night, I sat at my desk and wrote a letter I'd been composing in my mind for months, not to Adrian, but to myself. Dear Isabel, you made mistakes. You protected when you should have challenged. You gave money when you should have given tough love. You built an empire but failed to build character in the person who mattered most. But you also did something harder than building a fortune. When your son betrayed you in the worst possible way, you didn't destroy him. You didn't choose revenge over redemption. You gave him one last chance to become someone worthy of the Ravencroft name. That took more strength than any business deal you ever negotiated. Thomas would have been proud of that choice. Your mother would have been proud of that choice. Be proud of yourself. You survived poverty, sexism, loss, and betrayal. You built something from nothing, and now you're teaching your son to do the same, not by giving him everything, but by finally letting him fall and climb back up himself. That's love, the hard kind, the real kind, the kind that lasts. I folded the letter and put it in my mother's armoire, next to the folder of Adrian's childhood memories. 6 months from now, Adrian and I would have dinner at the house. A year from now, we'd spend Christmas together, carefully, but together. 5 years from now, maybe we'd have rebuilt something that resembled a real mother-son relationship, or maybe we wouldn't. Maybe the damage was too deep, the betrayal too complete. But I'd given him the chance. I'd given both of us the chance. And that was enough. I walked through my house one more time before bed. Every room was mine again. Every corner held memories, some painful now, some still sweet. The mansion in Greenwich where I'd raised my son, loved my husband, built my life. It had almost been stolen from me. But I'd fought back, not with rage or vengeance, but with patience and strategy. The same skills that had built my fortune had saved it. And maybe, just maybe, saved my son in the process. I climbed into bed and turned off the light. Outside, the October wind rustled through the trees Thomas and I had planted 20 years ago. Strong trees, deep roots, weathering storms, just like me. Tomorrow, I'd wake up and live the life I'd earned, the life I'd protected, the life I'd nearly lost but fought to keep. And somewhere in Stamford, in a modest apartment, my son would wake up and go to work. Not because I made him, not because I gave him everything, but because he'd finally learned to stand on his own. That was worth more than $42 million. That was worth everything.